moments about hidden power. Here were these powerful people who affected all of our lives so deeply, yet we knew little about them or about the tests that they produce. And I learned two things from that article and that process that really guide me today. The first was simply the power of magazines. Indeed, the power of magazines as opposed to daily newspapers and to television to convey important, long-lasting, and often complex ideas. The second was that when you fill information gaps about powerful people and powerful institutions, you have really important journalism that can become a great publishing idea, indeed a great business idea. Now let me elaborate. About a year or so after writing that article, I was standing in front of the career placement office at the Yale Law School. Not because I needed a job, I actually had one writing magazine articles, but because that was where the soda machine was. And as I was drinking my Diet Coke, or maybe at that time it was even real Coke, I was looking up at the bulletin board, and on the bulletin board outside the placement office were all these letters from big law firms around the country, New York and San Francisco and Cleveland and Chicago and all the other places, trying to recruit my classmates. Now there was something about those letters that was very interesting, and that is that they all looked exactly the same, and they all said exactly the same thing. Every single one of those law firms offered unique experience, working for uniquely interesting corporate clients, providing uniquely wonderful training, working with unique people of unique standards of integrity with uniquely high intellect. You get the point. And I decided, just sort of staring at that wall of those letters, that all those law firms, all these huge bastions of power, really can't be all the same. These are separate businesses run by different people, and there had to be differences among them. Some made more money than others. Some had better litigators. Some offered more equal opportunity to women, non-whites, and others than did the other firms. Some had to be more aggressive about getting new business. Some had to be more cost-effective for their clients. Some had to be nicer. Some had to be meaner. It was at that moment, really, that I decided to try to fill another information gap about a powerful institution, in this case the law, by starting the American Lawyer. Now, I won't bore you with all the details, but it worked. And from that one national magazine for lawyers predominantly practicing in large firms in large cities, our company expanded with various weekly and daily legal newspapers in various cities around the country, from Atlanta to Washington to San Francisco, which is, by the way, one way that I came to understand the power of newspapers, which is their immediacy and often their ability, because they're local, of connecting with a local community. Later on, I went after another information gap, and that was the public as opposed to lawyers. The public's lack of understanding about how the legal process really works. This time, the solution that I decided might make the most sense was a different medium, and that was the television medium. And the idea was Court TV, the cable network. And Court TV uses the benefits of the video medium, the ability to put someone right there to see something as it happens. And my target really was the misunderstanding that I thought that people had about how the legal system really works, how juries really decide things. So I wanted people to see what juries see. And that worked too. Then 2 years ago, after a disagreement with my partners at Time Warner and at NBC concerning the direction that Court TV ought to go in, I sold my interest in both Court TV and the American Lawyer back to Time Warner and decided to look at a new project. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a magazine, and I wanted it to be a magazine that fills what I consider to be the greatest information gap now out there when it comes to the powerful forces that govern our business lives, our political lives, indeed our personal lives. And those forces have to do with the media, in particular nonfiction media. And I have to tell you that I think this magazine that we're creating is really the ultimate magazine for the next century. We are, after all, plunging headlong into what's called the information age. And the premise of this magazine is that the information age needs an independent voice that worries not about the gadgetry of this new age, the technological gadgetry. That, I think, was yesterday's story. But that worries instead about what all these gadgets produce, the content, if you will. So, what is this magazine, and how did it happen? Well, as I was working on The American Lawyer and Court TV, it started to become clear to me that in terms of power and unaccountable power in this country, there really is one institution that arguably has more unaccountable power than the law and lawyers, and that's the press. Indeed, we even have a constitutional amendment giving the press unaccountable power in terms of the government being able to hold the press to account. And that, of course, is the way it should be. The government should not be out there judging what's good media and good reporting and what's not. With that in mind, actually, let me tell you a story about a moment when I knew that I really wanted to try to start something like this magazine. And it was when we at Court TV were preparing for the famous, infamous O.J. Simpson trial. And as we were preparing, we were hearing, we were in the midst of applying for the press passes that our reporters would need to go to the trial. We were already had already been named as the people who would operate the camera in the trial, but our reporters, like everyone else, needed to get a seat at the trial. And as we were going through that process, I started hearing war stories from our people out in Los Angeles about how the Washington Post might have to share a seat with the National Enquirer, about how NBC and Hard Copy were trying to figure out how to share seats because there just weren't enough seats in the courtroom. I also heard that Judge Ito was concerned about all the crowding and was actually considering an idea whereby each press entity applying for a press pass would write an essay explaining what their goals were and how they would cover the trial. He wanted good media to cover the trial. Well, I thought that was a completely terrible idea, and I called him and I told him so. You see, I didn't want some court clerk or even a judge making value judgments saying, you're a good reporter, you're not a good reporter. You're good media, you're not. Then again, I thought that somehow, in some way, somebody should start to make those kinds of distinctions. Maybe not those black-white distinctions of good and bad, but someone, somehow, should start making those distinctions. Indeed, I began to think that the way to raise the standards of journalism, or at least apply standards, was with journalism, not government. And then I started thinking about it in bigger terms. We live in the information age. We're all being bombarded from all sides by all kinds of media, new and old. Websites, 24-hour cable, docudramas, old media competing with new media, newsletters, talk radio, infomercials, you name it. Now, how are we supposed to know what to rely on and what not to rely on? How are we supposed to know what to believe or whom to believe? And more broadly, how are we supposed to make sense of all the media forces that are shaping our perceptions and our kids' perceptions of everything around us in a way that they never could years ago when all citizens were more intimately connected with the news and the social and cultural forces that affect their lives? If we live in an information age and in an information economy, I thought, shouldn't we know something about our sources? So I started this magazine called Content, and of course, even before the first issue, I had to call it Brill's Content because of the inevitable trademark problems of calling anything by any name these days. Now, what category is content? When you're at a newsstand, where is it? Well, it's kind of a business publication because it's heavy on the who and the how behind what you're reading at the office. And it's kind of a tech publication because it's all about what the results of all this new technology are. And it's kind of like People or Vanity Fair because it's all about the people, backstage and center stage, in the most fascinating business in the world. But it's really none or all of the above. It's a new category, which I call the content category. Indeed, if magazines like Entertainment Weekly or Premiere that cover the who and the how behind movies and sitcoms and CDs are entertainment magazines, then a magazine that's about the who and the why not of everything that purports to be nonfiction, from teen magazines to financial newsletters to textbooks to the press's reporting of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, that kind of magazine is a content magazine. And as I like to say, just because we got there first and managed to get the category's name into our name doesn't mean it's not a category. But being a new category, frankly, makes it hard to sell at the beginning. On the other hand, because it's a new idea. On the other hand, we were helped, as many of you know, by the tremendous